September 30th, 2025. Inside a room filled with 800 generals and admirals, the President of the United States stands at the podium and says something no one expects. We're thinking about battleships again. Real steel, 6-inch armor, not aluminum. For decades, the U.S. Navy has built ships designed to hide fast, smart, and fragile. But now, the question is simple and terrifying. What happens when hiding no longer works? China is building warships faster than we can count. Missiles now fly at hypersonic speed. And one hit can turn a billion-dollar destroyer into liquid metal. So Washington is asking a forbidden question. Did we trade fear for efficiency? What if the future of naval warfare isn't stealth, but a 50,000-ton steel monster built to take the hit and keep fighting? Because when the missiles run out and the sensors go blind, naval war comes down to one truth. One ship floats, and one ship sinks. September 30th, 2025, 10:14 a.m. Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia. The room is filled wall to wall with power. Nearly 800 senior military officers, generals and admirals who have designed, funded, and fought America's modern wars. Dress uniforms line the rows. Metals catch the light. The air conditioning struggles against the dense, human, protein-heavy atmosphere. No one is relaxed. The mood is compressed, alert. At the podium stands the President of the United States. He isn't discussing logistics, readiness, or procurement cycles. He's talking about steel. It's something we're actually looking at, he says, leaning closer to the microphone. The idea of a battleship, nice, thick sides, 6 inches, real steel, not aluminum. For decades, the U.S. Navy has wagered its future on speed, stealth, and sensors. Ships built to see first, strike first, and disappear. Hulls shaped by radar equations, not brute force. Digital dominance over physical endurance. What the President is proposing is a reversal, a hard pivot back toward armor. I look at those ships, he continues, gesturing toward the past, toward the Iowa-class giants of World War II. They had destroyers riding with them, and nothing was stopping them. To a civilian audience, it sounds like nostalgia, a romantic pull toward the black and white era of big guns and bigger silhouettes. Inside the Pentagon and across the Pacific in the planning rooms of the Chinese Navy, it sounds like something else entirely. A challenge. If an order comes down forcing the Navy to abandon the tin-can-destroyer philosophy in favor of 20,000-ton steel behemoths, everything changes. Shipyards, doctrine, budgets, the physics of naval warfare itself. The real question isn't whether battleships can return, but whether, if they do, they can survive. To understand the gravity of the idea, you have to start with the metal. The President's criticism centers on a single word: aluminum. For the last 4 decades, modern warships have used aluminum alloys in their superstructures to save weight. Lighter ships move faster, burn less fuel, and can carry enormous radar arrays without becoming unstable in heavy seas. It's how a destroyer like the Arleigh Burke-class carries skyscraper-sized sensors without capsizing. But aluminum carries a scar in naval history. On November 22, 1975, the cruiser USS Belknap collided with the aircraft carrier USS John F. Kennedy in the Mediterranean. Fires erupted instantly. The Belknap's aluminum upper decks didn't just burn. They lost structural integrity, melted, and collapsed inward. The ship folded into itself like a dying furnace. 7 sailors were killed. The cruiser was effectively destroyed. That image, a warship liquefying under fire, is burned into institutional memory. It's the unspoken fuel behind the steel versus aluminum debate. What the President is really tapping into is a fear that modern missile warfare has turned America's most advanced ships into glass cannons, lethal, sophisticated, and terrifyingly fragile. The so-called Golden Fleet whispered about in Washington isn't about recommissioning the USS New Jersey or the USS Wisconsin. Those ships are relics, 80 years old. Their engines are exhausted. Their replacement parts belong behind museum glass. This is about something else. A 21st century battleship. Picture a hull displacing 20,000 tons, twice the mass of a modern destroyer. 6 inches of hardened steel armor. nuclear propulsion, no powder bags or turreted cannons, but hundreds of vertical missile cells and high-energy railguns. A ship built not to evade combat but to absorb it. A brawler, not a ghost. And here's the problem. The Navy didn't ask for this. For over a decade, Pentagon strategy has revolved around distributed maritime operations. It's ruthless, mathematical logic. Concentrate too much firepower in one massive hull, and you create a single catastrophic failure point. One fast-moving Chinese missile, one lucky hit, and you lose 2,000 sailors and $10 billion in seconds. So the Navy wants the opposite. A mosquito fleet. Small, numerous, often unmanned. Drone ships that cost a fraction of a destroyer and carry no crew at all. If one sinks, it's data, not a funeral. The current shipbuilding plan prioritizes frigates and unmanned vessels precisely because they're hard to track and easy to replace. The president's proposal flips that logic on its head. He argues that a mosquito fleet doesn't project power. A drone boat doesn't loom on the horizon. It doesn't cast a shadow off the coast of a hostile nation. An Iowa-class battleship does. When the USS Missouri entered the Persian Gulf in 1991, Iraqi troops surrendered to drones launched from its deck before it even fired a shot. And if it had, the argument at its core is that the US Navy has traded fear for efficiency. We have built fleets of flawless missile trucks, optimized, networked, lethal, but they no longer look dangerous. And in global politics, looking dangerous is often half the fight. So let's play it forward. Assume the order is signed. The Golden Fleet project becomes real. What follows is not romance or nostalgia, but the unforgiving physics of naval engineering. First, armor. 6 inches of solid steel along a ship's sides isn't a design choice. It's a weight crisis. American shipyards haven't poured true armor belts since 1945. The industrial base that once produced hardened battleship steel has withered to the point of near extinction. Before the first hull plate could be laid, the United States would have to rebuild the foundries that make the metal itself. Second, power. A modern battleship wouldn't burn oil. It would need nuclear reactors to generate the staggering electrical loads demanded by laser weapons and electromagnetic railguns. Lasers to swat missiles from the sky. Railguns firing projectiles at Mach 7. But embedding nuclear reactors inside a ship designed to be hit is a gamble with consequences. A successful strike on the reactor compartment doesn't just cripple a warship, it creates an environmental catastrophe with global fallout. Third, and most dangerous of all, the crew. This is the number that keeps admirals staring at the ceiling at night. An Iowa-class battleship required nearly 1,800 sailors. A modern Arleigh Burke destroyer needs roughly 300. The Zumwalt class operates with about 175. And today, the US Navy is facing the worst recruiting crisis in its history. We don't have enough sailors to man the fleet we already own. A new battleship fleet would demand thousands of highly trained personnel, unless automation replaces them. Could you build a battleship that runs with 200 people? Possibly, but you'd sacrifice the one advantage size gives you: survivability through damage control. Ships don't survive because they're thick. They survive because crews fight fires, seal compartments, and keep water out. A massive ship with a skeleton crew doesn't sink because it's hit. It sinks because no one is left to save it. Then there's China. The Chinese Navy is building warships at a pace the United States hasn't matched since World War II. Their yards are turning out Type 055 destroyers, 13,000-ton cruisers that may be the most powerful surface combatants afloat today. The president's argument is that America is losing the weight war, building fewer, lighter ships while China builds bigger, heavier ones at scale. But China's strategy isn't about ship-to-ship duels. It's about denial. Along its coastline, China has constructed a dense missile fortress design specifically to kill large, slow, visible targets. Critics argue that building a battleship in 2025 is like sending a knight in full-plate armor onto a modern battlefield. Thickness doesn't matter when a missile arrives at Mach 10. At those speeds, steel doesn't resist, it vaporizes or shatters. The energy of impact makes traditional armor irrelevant. That reality is why the Navy shifted from passive defense absorbing damage to active defense, destroying the missile before it hits. And yet, a counterargument is gaining momentum inside the White House. Defense is bankrupting us. Today, when a rebel group launches a $20,000 drone at a U.S. destroyer, we respond with a $2 million interceptor. We are trading Ferraris for Toyotas, and it's unsustainable. A battleship armed with guns or railguns changes the equation. A shell costs pennies. A railgun shot costs roughly $25,000, not $2 million. If a heavily armored ship can sit offshore, absorb punishment, and return fire cheaply and relentlessly, it drains the enemy's wallet long before it drains ours. It forces adversaries to waste their most expensive weapons on a ship designed to endure, shielding the fragile aircraft carriers operating in the rear. So what does this mean for the future of the fleet? It means the Navy is splitting along philosophical lines. On one side is the technocrats' Navy. Stealthy, networked, unmanned, brilliant, and fragile. On the other is the populist Navy. Massive, visible, armored, and unapologetically blunt. The Golden Fleet proposal points to a compromise, a bridge between fear and efficiency. Imagine a hull with the physical presence of a battleship, but instead of massive gun turrets, it carries 500 vertical missile cells. An arsenal ship that never needs to close the distance. It sits 500 miles offshore and releases a saturation strike so dense it overwhelms enemy defenses through sheer volume alone. It would have the steel to survive the missile that slips through, the power generation to run lasers continuously. Not just a sword, but a shield. The problem is what it demands in return. Building a ship like this requires a level of national will the United States hasn't exercised in 80 years. It means confronting an uncomfortable possibility that 3 decades of naval design philosophy, the shift toward aluminum, speed, and efficiency at the expense of survivability, may have been wrong. And the Pentagon does not like admitting mistakes. September 30th was only a speech. But in the world of defense planning, a speech from the commander-in-chief functions as a signal flare. Somewhere inside secure buildings, design teams are already pulling old blueprints from archives. Engineers are running simulations, asking a forbidden question. What happens if we weld 6 inches of steel onto a nuclear-powered cruiser? Across the fleet, the arguments are growing louder. In wardrooms and mess halls, younger officers argue for drones, swarms, and algorithms. The old salts argue for steel. Steel in a ship that doesn't melt when it's hit. Because when everything else is stripped away, when the radar is jammed, the satellites are blinded, and the missiles are gone, naval combat reduces to its oldest truth. 2 hulls in the water. One stays afloat. One doesn't. Historically, the ship with thicker skin is the one that sails home. The president wants battleships back. The strategy is arguable. The price tag is staggering. The engineering challenges are immense. But standing before 800 senior officers, describing a ship that can walk through fire without liquefying, he touched something deep and instinctive in the military psyche. The desire to be unbeatable. Whether that instinct reflects reality or is merely a ghost left over from 1945 is something we may discover sooner than anyone expects. So here's the question. In a war against a peer rival like China, would you rather stand watch aboard a high-tech aluminum destroyer that survives by not being seen, or a 50,000-ton steel Leviathan built to take the hit and keep fighting? Does armor still matter in the age of hypersonic missiles? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. I'll see you in the next one.